we have the approval of 3 committee charters. We have a motion to repeal Special Proviso Number 4 and to transfer the responsibilities of the Special Committee on Governance to a newly constituted subcommittee of the Management Council. And we have a discussion, though not a decision, on electronic deliberation guidelines, which are the last major deliverable of the Special Committee on Governance. We're going to be going through the first 4 items. We'll have presentations of each item. We have a few amendments to 2 of the charters, and we will be making decisions on each of those items here in the meeting today. And the way that we're going to do that is we'll take up each item in order. We'll have a discussion of the item. We will then take up any amendments to the item, discuss those and dispose of them via an online voting procedure that I'll talk about here in a minute, and then proceed to take action on the main motion. We'll do that for each of the first 4 items. For the 5th item, which is the electronic deliberation proposal, we will have a discussion of that, but as I said, we won't be making a decision on that online today. Instead, we'll be making the decision in an electronic ballot, which will open not too far into the future. So we're using today a new online meeting interface, and for an explanation of how that interface works and how we use it to mediate our discussions and to make decisions, I'm going to pass the line over to Kay Shepard-Cohen from the Secretariat to describe the interface. Kay, take it away.
Thanks, Bob. You should be seeing on your screen some of the general directions that I want to make sure that everyone's clear about. The audio today should be coming through your computer speakers, so hopefully you can hear me. You can adjust the level of your volume over on the bottom left of your screen. You should see a speaker icon, and if you click on that, you should be able to turn the sound on or make adjustments. Also, you should know that by default, yes? By default, your computer microphone is muted for all the participants, so you will not be able to be heard. So if you'd like to ask a question, the first step would be to type it into the chat box, which is located on the left-hand side as well. If you would like to be unmuted so that you can speak, we'd also like to ask you to do an additional step, which is raise your hand by clicking the person icon on the bottom left of your screen and then selecting the raise hand icon. You'll see a little arrow there. It'll give you some choices. You raise your hand. Once you do that, then we will send to you, thank you, see it's being highlighted now. Once you do that, you'll be given directions on how to ask your question over the phone. So we won't keep flashing that information up, but if you let us know that's what you'd like to do, then we'll make sure that you get those right away. The last thing to know in terms of how this works is that if you want to put something in the chat to a specific person, not to everyone, if you look in the box that says participants on the left-hand side, everyone should be listed. If you click on the name of the person, you may select private message, so you can send something just to one person or one of the speakers. So that's the basic interface. The other thing to know, Bob has kind of gone through the agenda, told you about a lot of things we're talking about today. There are documents that go with each of those things. And in the lower right-hand side, you'll see a button that says Documents. And if you click on that, you can choose to look at some of the documents. They've been uploaded there, so you can also go there for your reference. We won't be pulling them up. Thank you. There's the highlight. We won't be pulling them up. We'll be going through some slides, a slide deck, but they're there for your access whenever you want to try to use them. Okay? And if you have a question, you can put it into the chat, and I'll make sure that we get any other technical details worked out. Otherwise, I will turn it back over to Bob.
Thank you, Kay. Okay, so with that explanation, I would like to formally call this meeting of the IDESG Online Plenary to order, and I will repeat what I said at the top of the meeting. Everyone should be aware that this meeting is being recorded. The purpose of the recording is to ensure that the discussion, at least of the electronic deliberation, proposal will be available in the future to people who will be participating in a future online electronic ballot on that proposal. Thanks and welcome to all of you. So here's the agenda that we're going to go through today, but before we go through the agenda, I'd like to ask Sudi Amarji. Sudi, do we have a quorum for consensus and voting decision making?
Yes, we do, Bob. We do have quorum.
Okay, thank you. So we have 5 items on our agenda for today. The first is to review and approve the Standards Coordination Committee Charter. The second is to review and approve the Trust Framework and Trust Mark Charter. And the third is to review and approve the International Coordination Committee Charter. The second is a motion to repeal Proviso number 4 and transfer the responsibilities of the Special Committee on Governance to a new subcommittee of the Management Council. And the third is to have a discussion of the deliberation procedures which have been transmitted by the Special Committee on Governance in compliance with their charge under our rules for our consideration and adoption. And that no decision will be made on the last of those today. That will be purely a discussion. So if we could move to the next slide. So first, I should note that the charters are available at idecosystem.org/June 14th. You can also get them directly in the session today by clicking on the documents link at the lower right of your screen. And as I've said, we're going to go through them in the order which is on this slide. And by the way, the procedure that we will generally be following is I will be calling on a chair of the committee to present what the charter says and whether there have been any comments received by the Management Council, and if so, how those, from the Management Council, and if so, how those were disposed of in the drafting of the charter. We'll have a discussion of the charter. If anybody has any items to discuss, we will then proceed to consideration of any amendments, and we will vote on the amendments after discussion, and then we will vote on the main charter. And prior to any voting, of course, I'll ask whether there's an objection to the charter, and if there are no objections, since we have a consensus quorum, we will declare the item to have been adopted by consensus. So if we could have the next slide. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to pass the microphone to Kathy Tilton, who is the chair of the Standards Coordination Committee, for the purpose of having her describe to us the charter and any feedback that it may have been received and acted upon from the Management Council. Kathy, are you on the line?
I am. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
So if you'll flip to the next slide, please. Just an overview of the contents of our charter. It contains 13 sections. As you see listed there, the title of our committee is the Standards Coordination Committee. The IPR mode that we're working under is just the general IDESG IPR policy, but not the patent policy. Next slide. Some highlights of our charter is, first of all, that the SCC is not intended to be an SDO, a standards development organization, nor to develop standards, but to adopt existing standards and work with SDOs to develop and revise standards for our use. And the SCC will liaise with SDOs for that purpose. The SCC will take on stewardship of the use cases and vocabulary and will collaborate broadly with other IDESG groups in its work. And we generally get our work done through the use of ad hoc groups. Next. Deliverables, we have a dynamic work plan that we revisit occasionally, but specifically identified in the charter are inventories of standards, a use case document, identified standards gaps and profiles, standards adoption criteria, recommended standards, and a vocabulary document. Next. Some administrative items related to our standards. We have 3 officers, a chair, vice chair, and secretary. At this point, they're all interim. We lack a secretary, but the chair and vice chair are interim. Once this charter is approved, then we will embark on elections. Participation in our listserv and meetings is open. Membership in the SCC is open to IDESG members by self-declaration. And we've attempted to align our operations with the current rules of association. And we generally work by consensus decision-making, except that 2/3 votes is required on forwarding work products and on amending our charter, and a majority vote is required when consensus cannot be reached. Next. In terms of Management Council and plenary comments, we had no changes requested by the Management Council, but in the first meeting where we presented our charter, it was requested that we address more specifically the collaboration aspects, and we did add a section 11, on collaboration in response to that plenary comment. Next. Bob, do you want me to go ahead with the amendment or stop there?
So let's actually stop there for a moment. So Kathy will be discussing one amendment which the committee itself has proposed after the initial text of this document was presented. But in order to maintain procedural regularity, let's stop now and back up to the previous slide on the screen. And let me ask whether anyone would like to offer any comments or discussion on either the text of the charter or the discussion that Kathy has just led us through. And if you would like to comment or offer discussion, please go down to the lower left hand of your screen and raise your little blue avatar's hand by clicking on the little blue guy at lower left. And I'll be scrolling up and down through this to see whether anyone has a comment. And I'll provide a decent interval for people to indicate that they would like to comment if that's the case. I see no comments. With that, let's proceed to amendments that have been offered on this charter. So let's move to the next slide. Kathy, would you like to describe and motivate the amendment that you've proposed?
Sure. Two things I need to clarify. The part that is in red, in the version I submitted, there was strike-throughs on that, so it's intended that the text in red would be deleted. And the other clarification is that this issue came up after our last meeting, and so this amendment was actually submitted by me as a normal, everyday IDESG member.
And Kathy, if you could please describe the reasoning behind offering this amendment.
I sure will. Right now, it was really just a misinterpretation of something in the Rules of Association. We were trying so hard to align with the ROA, and in Section 12.16 of the ROA, it talks about voting rights, but it was talking about, it really is talking about how you calculate quorum for conducting business and for voting, not for how you vote. It's not for voting rights itself. And so this last part, to maintain those rights, the member must meet the requirements of ROA 12.16 makes no sense because ROA 12.16 applies to quorum and not to voting. And so the amendment I'm proposing is to delete the text in red.
On the grounds that it is a technical correction of the language?
Correct.
Thank you. So at this point, I'll ask whether there is any discussion of the amendment that Kathy has just described to us. And again, if you would like to discuss this amendment, the way to do that is to click the little blue guy at the lower left-hand side of your screen and alert Laura to the fact that you would like to make a comment. You can also do that. You can also comment via text by typing something into the chat window, and we'll take a look at that if it occurs. I see no discussion of the amendment, so I will ask whether any member of the plenary has an objection to the adoption of this amendment. I will note that this is not yet the call for adoption of the charter. This is only a call for consensus on adopting the amendment. If you have an objection to adopting the amendment, as usual, click the little blue guy and raise your hand. There being no objections, I will declare that the amendment has been adopted. Now that the amendment has been adopted, it's procedurally proper to ask whether there is any additional discussion of the charter as amended. If you would like to discuss the charter as amended, please either type a question or comment into the box or raise your hand. So I see that Peter Brown has raised his hand. Peter, I think you actually already have the capability to speak. So if you could unmute yourself and make your statement.
Yeah, it's just nothing of substance actually, except for just for good form to state that the Management Council did review this charter as it has done with every charter, and we have had no comment on it. We explicitly asked for any comments, considerations which need to be brought to the plenary's attention, and we've had none on this round.
Thank you, Peter. And if you could now lower your hand so that it doesn't become a matter of confusion. Are there any other comments on the charter as amended? There being no comments, I will ask whether any member has an objection to the adoption of the Standards Coordination Committee charter as amended. Again, if there's an objection, please indicate it by typing into the chat box or by clicking on the little blue guy to raise your hand. There being no objection, I will declare that we have adopted the charter for the Standards Coordination Committee. Thank you, Kathy.
Woohoo! I'm muting.
It's Miller time. Okay, so if we could have the next slide, please. Is it Kay or Laura who's driving the slides?
It's Kay. Sorry,
Okay.
It just takes a minute in between. And unfortunately, I guess it doesn't pick up where I left off. So I'm going to have to scroll through the standards.
Okay, that's fine. That's Groundhog Day. We're good. So the next item that we're going to be taking up will be the Trust Framework and Trust Mark Committee Charter. And here it is. Again, if you are interested in the text of this charter, you can go online to the IDESG website, or you can go to the Documents indicator at the lower right of your screen, click the little up arrow, and the document will be available for your inspection as PDF there. And we will be calling next on Rich Furr, the chair, provisional chair of this committee, to take us through this charter and to lead the discussion. Rich, are you unmuted and ready to talk?
I am always ready to talk, and I am also unmuted.
Thank you. Take it away.
If we could go to the next slide, Kay. Okay, this is going to give you a quick overview of the charter. One slide, basically a little bit of our work, initial thoughts about our work plan, some of the dependencies that we see moving forward, and you can disregard that last bullet. That's a remnant of a previous deck. So we can go to the next slide. Okay. So the Trust Framework Committee is actually a combination of the Trust Framework Committee, the Accreditation Coordination Committee, and the legal committees combined into a Trust Framework and Accreditation Committee. And the key goals and key drivers for this committee are to liaise with existing trust frameworks, including organizations and entities such as Kantara, Safe Biopharma, InCommon, OIX, and as we discovered in the meeting last Tuesday, more than likely Fixus as well. These are all FICAM certified trust framework providers, and in the case of at least Safe Biopharma, also cross-certified with the Federal Bridge for PKI credentials X509 at up to the medium hardware assurance level. We are charged to develop evaluation criteria for evaluating identity system entities. And although we reference here 800-63-1 and draft version 2 and ISO 29115, although these are pretty good baseline documents, there are also documents that we're aware of that other governments and other entities are using to build their trust frameworks. And one of our goals is to keep as light a hand as possible, but to maintain enough control so that we can be sure that when we provide a trust mark to an entity, that it will be in such a condition that it will be able to interoperate and that its credentials can be trusted by other entities within the IDESG. Tom Sveninghoff's group, the legal committee, has been developing some legal contracts for participation. Those need to be done. We realize that developing this trust mark program is not going to be an overnight process. We're hoping to have some good progress made by the end of 2013. And we have begun last Wednesday at our first meeting to begin to develop, at least develop. I won't say that we're executing yet, although we do have 2 subgroups formed to execute a work plan towards moving forward with our work. Next slide. So we did, as I mentioned, were formed out of the Management Council report recommending the development and establishment of this committee. We did decide Wednesday at our meeting that we would provisionally accept those existing certified trust frameworks, identity providers and credential service providers that are currently FICAM approved as of this point in time, but they must also stay current with the evolving strategy moving forward, with special interest towards aimed at the 4 principles of the NSTIC program. We do have some uncertainties about applying the accreditation program to at least 2 of the pilots. As I mentioned, it's going to take us some time to get this up and going. So this bullet is kind of on the back burner for right now until we get farther down the road. We are working on establishing relationships with the trust frameworks that are out there, as well as any other interested entities that would be interested in developing a trust framework. And as noted, we do have a couple subcommittees that we do have started to work on looking at the development of the framework and adoption, and looking at alternative approaches to the complexities of going through a formal, rather drawn-out, detailed assessment that you find when you go through the FICAM and the Federal Bridge programs. So I think the goal is that we've got a pretty broad spectrum of players, and in order to ensure that this whole program stays attractive and draws more people into it, we're going to be looking at alternative means of accreditation. Also realizing that the one of the big drivers here is going to be on pulling in relying parties and also how we then deal with relying parties. So the next slide, please, Kay. So look, these are some of the first things that we feel we need to look at. We need to develop what the value proposition of becoming a certified trademarked or trust-marked entity within the IDESGR, build the roadmap towards the development of the accreditation program and trust framework adoption process, establish the specific requirements and assessment criteria for trust frameworks, relying parties, attribute providers, assessors, etc., and again, leverage what we've got available to us with the existing trust frameworks and the approved IDPs, CSPs that are already out there and approved under FICAM. Next slide. I think we're getting close to the end here. We do have realized that we've got a lot of dependencies and that we are going to rely not only on the output of the organizations like the Privacy Committee, Standards Committee, Security and Usability, but it became very apparent yesterday in our meeting that we're also going to rely on organization entities and committees like the Financial Committee and, of course, the International Relations Committee moving forward. So we are actually working to try and determine the best way to do that and get those liaisons and those contacts built. And heretical as it may seem, thinking, should these actually still be separate committees, or should some way they become part of the Trust Framework Committee moving forward? And I think that may be the last slide we've got, Kay.
Yeah, that's the last slide.
Okay, so that's where we are with trust frameworks.
Thank you, Rich. Can I just ask one quick question of you?
Yes, well, yes or no answer.
Okay, well, I'll ask another one without asking. Okay. Under your charter, is the committee open to participation by any IDESG member who is interested?
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. And we did not have specific, the charter as it was put forward. I might mention that I received the charter prior to becoming the chair, and it had been approved. We didn't have specific voting requirements in that charter, so all members of the committee would be eligible to vote, and it is open to IDESG members.
Thank you. Okay, so at this point, I am not aware that any amendments have been received for application to this charter, and that's just for y'all's information. And by the way, I would like to say thank you to Rich for stepping into the breach here. And also, I'd like to thank everybody who's online. We have very good participation today, and I appreciate the ability to have a quorum for making these procedural decisions. It will free up a lot of time at our next face-to-face meeting to do the more fun, substantive work. So I'm grateful to everyone who's here, and I hope you will remain on the line until we finish our decision-making business, particularly given that it is Friday afternoon. So with that, I'll ask whether there are any comments on the Trust Frameworks and Trustmark Committee proposed charter, and if there are, please indicate that you have a comment either by raising your hand, by clicking the little blue guy at the bottom left of your screen so that I can get instructions to you about how to speak, or by typing a comment into the chat box. So I note that Judith Fleener says that she's just noticing that the charter is very basic and the discussion PowerPoint included much more detail. She says, I think it's okay to keep the charter brief, but I'm just checking that that's okay. So I'll comment on that, since I think it's not a comment to Rich so much as a comment to the overall management, and then maybe I'll have Peter Brown also comment on it. Unlike some of the other committee charters, this one was created after we revised the Rules of Association, and part of the intention of the revision of the Rules of Association was to make it clear that committees, didn't have to adopt super detailed charter language because they could adopt the provisions of the Rules of Association and use those as the basis for their organization and decision-making procedures. So I think the other charters that you've seen, including the Standards Coordination Committee charter, were created before the revision to the Rules of Association, and I think it's normal that one of the new charters would have a little bit less detail, given that there's more explicitly to rely on from the Rules of Association. Peter, did you have a comment that you would like to make on Judith's question?
No, I think you said most of it. We, as with the other charters, we have had a review of that in Management Council. This charter it was a much more iterative process, in the sense that for the, as you mentioned yourself, the original round of charter adoptions was very much of a linear process, with the charters coming to Management Council for sign-off before they went to plenary. In this case, it was slightly more complex, because there was an ongoing discussion about the merger of the three committees, and there was several rounds back and forth between Management Council and the nascent group that led to this merger. So there's no comment so much on the substance, but specifically to Judith's point, I think part of the consideration in getting this committee up and running was that it would be better to get a charter which was short, sweet, and to the point, and allowed it to get working, rather than getting bogged down into several weeks or several cycles of detailed considerations of specific elements of work planning. So in that sense, that explains why it's probably a little thinner than other charters. But generally, we were satisfied that it hit the right sort of sweet spot of being broad enough to cover the issues which we felt were necessary to be covered, and without being tied down to too much detail at this stage. And I think the detail will come in the work plan as the committee starts getting up to cruise speed. In the formal review period, which we had a couple of weeks back, there were no formal comments on the draft charter as presented.
Yeah, and Peter and Bob, I would agree totally that as we begin the work of the committee and we get down into the details of the work plan, that's where you're going to see more and more detail.
Right, exactly.
And I'll just note that we have, since the revision of the Rules of Association, now put in place more formal governance of the work plans of all the committees, and more coordination between the Management Council and the plenary. And in particular, I've asked Ozzy Greenwood to take over the role of handling the liaison on work planning with the committee chairs and with the Management Council. So there is now some organizational apparatus in place to make those processes run more smoothly. Are there any other questions or comments for Rich regarding the charter? And again, I'll remind everyone who's online that you indicate a question or comment by clicking the little blue guy to raise your hand if you would like to speak, or by typing your question or comment into the chat box. Seeing no further comments, I will ask, given that there are no amendments proposed to this charter, whether there is any objection to the adoption of the Trust Framework and Trust Mark Committee Charter as proposed. Again, if you have an objection, please indicate it by raising your hand by clicking the little blue guy in the lower left hand of your screen. Seeing no objection, I will declare that we have by consensus adopted the Trust Framework and Trust Mark Committee Charter. Thank you very much, Rich.
And thank you, and I am back to mute.
Thank you. So the next of our charters, while Kay flashes through the slides to get to the right point, is the International Coordination Committee Charter. And we have with us here today Don Tebow, one of the chairs of that committee, and I believe that Kay has gotten us to the appropriate part of the slide deck. So Jim Williams, I note that you have a red X next to your name. Did something happen that I should know about there? Laura, can you communicate with Jim and see, oh, wait, it went away. Oh, wait, no, it didn't go away. Can you communicate with Jim and see whether he has a problem that needs to be sorted out?
Sure. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so in order to discuss the International Coordination Committee Charter, I will now hand the microphone over to Don Tebow. Don, are you with us and unmuted?
I am and I am. Can you hear me, Bob?
I can. Thank you. Take it away.
Just a point of clarification. I am the interim chairman of the International Coordinating Committee. We have a increasingly robust election going on, so I'm pleased to report that we're getting more interest in the leadership of this effort. As indicated, this is short and sweet and to the point. I guess from an overall point of view, the committee views itself as a primary conduit for communications from the global ecosystem and participants to the NSTIC and IDESG and Plenary. So we have that goal of international coordination as kind of our central theme. Also, by way of background, this work builds on previous work through the International Coordination Working Group, which preceded this committee. I was chair of that, and the output of that was what we called an inventory of NSTIC-like efforts worldwide. Contributions to that inventory, we owe a debt of thanks to our colleagues in Kantara who provided a lot of the content for that. So we're building on a base of some knowledge, a snapshot, if you will, of other efforts worldwide to the NSTIC and IDESG. Having said all that, as you can see, we really are engaged in an effort to try and identify best practices and provide that knowledge to and from the Plenary and the IDESG. We see ourselves as looking at those best practices for particularly relevant content that we might be able to recommend. And I think provide some leadership and coordination again for the coordination of these efforts. One thing I think that is important to point out, and I guess Kay, if you could advance the slide, we also were clear about what we were not going to do. And we were very deliberate in saying that this committee would not involve itself in the very important dialogue around standards coordination. We're leaving that to our colleagues in other committees, but we do not see ourselves as developing or submitting or being the liaison point vis-a-vis international Internet identity standards. With that, I think the effort is fairly self-evident, again noting that SDO coordination is out of scope. And with that, Kay, you may want to advance the slide because I know we have some additions in terms of proposed amendments.
So,
I think it's fair to...
Let's actually not go to the amendments until after we've had the discussion on the main motion first.
Happy to do so, Bob. I think the rest is fairly self-explanatory and, again, fits this activity into the mainstream of the rules of association and the interface with other committees as noted.
Thanks, Don.
Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Don. And while we are having a call for a discussion on this main motion, I've asked Laura to get audio conversation instructions to Henrik Beering and Ian Dobson, who have proposed the amendments, and we will be discussing those momentarily. So, but before we go into discussion of amendments, would anybody like to ask a question or make a comment to Don regarding the charter as proposed? And again, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please either type the text of your question or comment into the chat facility at lower left, or click on the little blue guy at lower left of your screen to raise your hand, and we'll recognize you to make a comment. I see no comments, so with that, if you could...
Oh, sorry, I maybe should just add, just as I have for the others, that there were no, in the review process in Management Council, there were no additional formal comments or requests to the committee.
Thank you, Peter. So, Kay, if you could advance to the next slide. And Laura, do we have Henrik Beering on the audio channel?
Let me check real quick.
So Henrik, you're probably aware, since you're listening, that I'm talking about you. So if you are on the audio channel and unmuted, please feel free to speak up and introduce yourself.
Bob, this is Sudi. Henrik is not on the audio channel as yet. He has to call in, and he has not done so yet.
Okay. And Ian Dobson called into the audio channel yet?
Not yet.
Okay. So the first proposed amendment, I will read the text of the amendment while we're waiting for Henrik to join if he chooses to do so, and then I'll, Don, ask you whether you have any objection to the amendment or whether you consider it to be friendly. So the amendment has been proposed by Henrik Beering. The amendment is to the objectives section of the document, and Henrik wishes to replace the word similar with the word relevant in the second bullet. Thanks, Ian, for indicating that you're on audio. And the rationale for making the replacement is to further clarify that IDESG is not an international identity standards body, which is one of the things that that Don had gone over later in the document. And Henrik types into the chat that he has no comments apart from the written amendment. So, Don, would you care to respond to this amendment and give us your feeling about it?
I think the amendment is a positive one, and it provides further clarity, and it's one that I support.
Thank you. With that statement, is there anyone else who would like to make a comment or ask a question about amendment number 1? Again, if you have a comment or question, feel free to type it into the chat or to click on the little blue guy in the lower left to raise your hand. I see no additional comments or questions. So with that, I will ask whether there is an objection to adopting amendment number 1 to the International Coordination Committee Charter. If there is an objection, please indicate so by raising your hand by clicking on the little blue guy. There being no objection, I will state that we have adopted amendment number 1. Kay, can we proceed to the next slide? Amendment number 2 has been proposed by Ian Dobson, who indicates to me via the window here that he is on the phone line. Ian, are you unmuted and able to communicate with us? I'm not hearing anything.
So, Bob, this is Sudhi. I do not see Ian on the phone, but or here, but maybe he's on, and I just don't know about it. But I don't think he is.
He's put a little yes or a tick sign next to his name on the participants list.
So, Ian, we see the green check mark, but we do not see, we do not hear anything from you. So, until we can hear from you, I will proceed to read the text of the amendment. And if you have something to say, please call in. If you have something to communicate with me without speaking it, please type it into the chat box. So Ian Dobson of the Open Group has proposed this amendment. It is, once again, to the ICC committee charter. This is an amendment to the rationale section. And the proposal is to amend the second sentence of the rationale to read, this committee will also serve as a resource to non-standards development organization international entities. And the rationale of the amendment is to clarify that there are two objectives rather than just one objective in the rationale section. I will, as before, ask Don to comment on the amendment and to talk about whether he considers it to be a friendly amendment. Oh, Ian has his hand up. Ian, can you type something into the chat box to alert me to why your hand is raised? Meanwhile, Don, would you like to comment on your response to the amendment?
Yes, I consider this a positive and helpful clarification, and I support the amendment as proposed.
So Ian still has his hand raised. Laura, are you able to communicate with Ian in the chat channel and find out whether he is having difficulties?
Yeah,
or?
He just chatted to me that he's calling in now.
Oh, okay. So in the meantime, while Ian is calling in, I'll wait for him to get on the line before we proceed to action on this. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment about the proposed amendment number 2?
Yeah, Bob, this is Rich Furr, and I think that it's a very good amendment because there are a number of entities, for instance, Project Debo, a lot of work going on in the UK Cabinet Office, and other entities, especially in the European Union, that I think would be very good for coordination. And they are not SDOs, but they are definitely involved in driving a lot of identity activity, especially in the EU, so I think it's a good amendment.
Thank you, Rich. Ian, are you on?
Bob, this is Sudhi. Ian is not on the phone.
Okay. So I guess given that no one has spoken against the amendment, it is not an abusive procedure to not wait for Ian and to proceed to ask whether anyone has an objection to the adoption of amendment number 2 to the ICC committee charter. And again, if you have an objection, please indicate it by clicking the little blue guy on the lower left-hand side of your console to raise your hand, or by typing something into the chat box. Colin Walls asks, clean copy does not have the word also. Clean copy, I presume, of the charter or of the amendment? Colin, could you answer that in the chat box?
I understood Amendment 2 is just adding the word also. That's the whole point.
Oh, of the charter, yes. Yes.
That is the point.
Yes, Colin, you're right. That the addition of the word also is in fact the point of the amendment, and you're correct that as a result of that, the charter does not have it. So, Colin, can you clarify whether this constitutes an objection or whether everything is okay? Okay, so Colin assures us that all is clear now. Seeing no objection, I will note that we have passed by consensus amendment number 2 to the International Coordination Committee charter. So moving on to the next slide, amendment number 3, also from Ian, who may or may not still be attempting to dial in. Ian, are you with us on the phone?
Hi, Bob. I did get a chat from Ian that he said he's fine with you moving forward without his voice input.
Thank you. Okay, so this amendment is also proposed by Ian Dobson of the Open Group. This is to the general provision section of the document, page number 4. And Ian's proposal is in 2 parts. The first is to move this general provision section from where it currently stands in the charter to above the roles and responsibilities section. And second, to add to the only existing sentence in this section so that it reads in its entirety, this committee will conduct itself in conformance with the IDESG Management Council's note on roles and responsibilities of committees and groups, and in conformance with the IDESG Rules of Association. The following sections are intended to facilitate availability on key processes, but the IDESG Management Council / ROA terms will prevail. So once again, I will ask Don to respond to this amendment, and then I'll ask for comments and questions.
I have no objection to this amendment and would support its approval.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment or ask a question about this amendment to the proposed ICC charter? Seeing no objection, I'll note that we have approved by consensus amendment number 3 to the ICC committee charter. Now that we've concluded the consideration of amendments, I'll ask whether there is any further discussion of the International Coordination Committee charter as amended. I see no discussion or questions. Yeah?
I have a chat from Ian, and he says, my amendment here covers exactly what you and Peter said earlier. The ROA should be sufficient not to add detail on process.
Okay. Thank you. So seeing no additional requests for conversation or questions, I will ask whether there is any objection to adopting the International Coordination Committee Charter as amended by Amendments 1, 2, and 3. If there is an objection, please indicate it by clicking on the little blue guy on the lower left-hand side of your console to raise your hand. Seeing no objection, I will note that we have adopted the International Coordination Committee Charter by consensus. Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Our next item of business, if we can move to the appropriate slide, is a motion to repeal Proviso number 4 of the Rules of Association. For discussion of this motion, I will pass the microphone to our Special Committee on Governance co-chair, Daza Greenwood. Daza, are you with us and unmuted?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Bob. So this motion is specifically to repeal Proviso 4 and to create a new committee and to have the new committee be formed based upon appointment of IDESG members by the plenary chair and the management council chair, and to sit as a subcommittee with the management council, and to work on the governance tasks that remain under Proviso 4, which now, frankly, are focused on preparing the IDESG for transition to self-sustaining group. The other tasks that had been, and also to, as part of that, review the many proposals for how the next major revisions of the rules of association might look, from different methods of voting to different approaches to decision making. The specific tasks that have been allocated initially to the task force of coming up with the rules of association as a replacement for the charter and bylaws that were generated by government, and then also creating a membership agreement with IP policy, and working with members to generate a draft e-deliberation process, and the other matters that were referred to in the Proviso 4 and the prior work of the preceding committees have been accomplished. Those are now in play, and the real need now is for there to be better coordination and focus on the future. So the slide that you see now is a slide that Eric Skase, who's the co-chair of the committee, put together this morning, and that just reviewing. But okay, so it looks like he's going through some of his sense of the background and some of his understandings of how things will be structured going forward. And so I hope and think that the motion speaks for itself. I do think it makes sense, and I invite and request your positive consideration.
Thanks very much, Daza. And before we proceed to discussion, I think it's appropriate here to stop and to thank the members of the Special Committee on Governance, and in particular the two chairs, Eric and Daza. All of you who have been here for a while are aware that we inherited a somewhat imperfect set of rules, and that we went through a fairly effort-intensive set of activities to turn them into something that we were comfortable with and we could use. There's a lot of good work done in this committee, and not least of which is the electronic deliberation rules, which you will see after we conclude this work item. And I would just like to formally acknowledge that work and to thank Daza and Eric and the members of the committee for having done that work. Peter, did you want to add anything to that?
To echo your words of thanks, and also just to add, which I think Daza hinted at in his overview, which is that this motion to repeal goes in tandem with an action within the Management Council, which is precisely to agree to set up this new subcommittee. And we decided really not to prejudge the plenary decision on this, but once this motion is repealed today, this will be an item of the agenda for our next Management Council meeting. And as in line with this motion, Bob Blakely and myself, as the two respective chairs of plenary and of Management Council, will make a proposal to the Management Council for the membership and leadership of this new subcommittee.
Thanks, Peter. So with that, are there any questions or comments to Daza about the motion on the table? And if there are such things, you can indicate them by clicking on the little blue guy on the lower left, or by typing your questions or comments into the chat box. Seeing no questions or comments, I'll ask whether there's any objection to adopting the motion to repeal, I don't know why I can't say that word, proviso number 4, and to create the new subcommittee of the Management Council. If there is an objection, please type it into the chat box or click on your little blue guy to indicate the objection. Seeing no objection, I will note that we have adopted the motion to repeal proviso number 4. I'm going to say that 100 times tonight. And to create the new subcommittee of the Management Council. Thank you very much, Daza. But of course, you're not off the hook yet. So our last item of business, and by the way, I'll pause here, and I will thank everyone who has participated today for participation in our consensus procedures. This has been very smooth and very efficient so far. We've taken just 1 hour to get through 4 items of business, and we've cleared a lot of governance actions off the table, which will give us more time to talk to each other about real identity issues and doing the work of the organization at our next plenary in Boston. So I appreciate that very much. And given that we are now finished with the decision-making portion of the meeting, I will extend the invitation to anyone who has a pressing commitment, at their day job or, with family for Father's Day or anything. There will no longer be any quorum consequences if anyone who needs to drops off at this point. I think it's going to be a useful discussion that takes place now, but we will forgive you if you feel that you have to leave. So with that, I'd like to turn the microphone back to Daza Greenwood to discuss the e-deliberation procedures which the Special Committee on Governance is offering to us, which will be finding their way onto an electronic ballot at some point in the near future, unless there is a significant amount of contention. And if there is a lot of contention and people think that more work needs to be done, we will take the matter up at the next in-person plenary. So Daza, back over to you.
Okay, I thank you. And so what you see here at the other end of the link of e-deliberation procedures is a document that proposes how IDSG would address decision-making matters and deliberation outside of the context of the in-person meeting, which is primarily how we do things at this point. The particulars more or less mirror how the group has already utilized the process, including what we're doing right now, having had matters that were put before the group by notice, opportunity for amendments to be submitted and considered, and then a live remote meeting for amendments to be debated, accepted, or rejected, and then for either consensus to prevail or potentially an electronic ballot, as we've done in the past, to be utilized to measure the vote of the group to pass the matter. This codifies that procedure, and it would have some consequences. There would be some changes here, and I think one notable aspect that I'll highlight is that the somewhat what should I call it? Complex and heavily sequenced and replete with due process decision-making rules that we have in Section 5 and in Standing Rule Number 1 are simplified with this process, and the other aspect is that there is a concept of a well, I guess I would say that I think there's a sense that there would be ways for members to have dialogue even prior to the live meeting through our committees and through some online resources. Of course, we have listservs and others that will develop over time to take some of the load of the discussion leading up to the formal decision making. So those are the highlights, and I actually must say that Bob is owed the credit for this particular draft. You're the one, Bob, that was able to commit it to writing, and it reflects, I think, largely what I wanted to know, which is, as chair, how you would envision running these things in detail. And I might just ask if you would wish to describe what your intent was here and what the words mean. I would hope that you could do that, but I did my best there to describe overall what it is and why I think it's worth positive consideration.
Sure, thanks, Daza. So the concept here is that in electronic deliberation, so by the way, by way of background, we have had discussions in the Management Council and among the leadership generally about, in the future, trying to hold some of our meetings exclusively online, not just for reasons of cost containment, but also for reasons of fairness to people who either for schedule reasons or for resource constraint reasons can't always attend an online meeting. So it's desirable, in our view, to be able to hold periodic meetings entirely electronically in which everyone is on equal footing. With that in mind, we wanted to preserve a couple of characteristics of the decision-making of the organization. The first was that we wanted to be able to make consensus decisions. The second was that we felt that it was important to preserve the roles of the Management Council and the Privacy Committee and make sure that they have their input and their ability to object to proposals preserved in an online meeting context. And the third was that we wanted to preserve the general structure of having a first reading at which consensus decisions could be made, and then if consensus hadn't been achieved, requiring a second action in order to proceed to a vote. So the general structure of the e-deliberation procedures is basically a four-phase process. The first phase is the posting of the materials to be taken up at the meeting, so basically posting of the agenda and the materials that will be considered. The second is a markup conference. That is an online meeting held electronically. No technology is specified in the document to allow both the organization and the Secretariat to determine, what the most appropriate set of tools is. And the markup conference basically is very similar to what we're going through today. So it is a session where a document is reviewed, amendments are raised and discussed, and then a call for consensus decision-making. The way the consensus works is a little different than what we're doing today. It's a little bit more deliberative. So after the markup conference, there's a study period. And the study period is a period during which people can go away and decide whether what they've heard at the markup conference gives them confidence that everything is okay, or whether they think there needs to be an objection raised. So any proposal that doesn't have an objection raised during the study period, which is at least a week, then is determined to have been adopted by consensus. So people have a week basically to raise their hand and say, no, I think we really need to do some more work on this and potentially have a vote. So if no objection is raised during the study period, then the proposal is treated as adopted. If an objection is raised during the study period, then we proceed to an electronic ballot on the item. So that's a basic outline of the procedure. I guess at this point, it's appropriate to ask, and by the way, I will note once again that we're not making a decision on this procedure today. This is an opportunity for everyone to ask questions about this procedure, to discuss it, to propose changes, and we will, depending on how people feel about this, we will either put it onto an electronic ballot for some time in the future, or we will take it up for further discussion at the next meeting. So after the discussion that we have here in the meeting today, I will ask people to go down to the little blue guy arrow at the left-hand side of the screen and either select the green check mark or the red X to judge what the sentiment is about the general outlines of the procedure. And if there are a lot of red X's, we will carry this forward into the in-person meeting. If there aren't a lot of red X's, then we will proceed to put the proposal on an electronic ballot. And Kay has just put up the the polling procedure, which we will be following at the end. So, so now I'll open it up to conversations and questions, and I note that Steve Mednick already has his hand up. Steve, I think you are unmuted. So
I am here. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. The question I have on the period of time during the study period where a matter can actually be approved by consensus, we currently, in the rules, under the quorum rule, have 1216.3, which establishes that 14-day time frame, which in effect is a replacement for a live body quorum. Would you consider that we need to have language that establishes that study period, or the time frame for that study period, would be the equivalent to the 14 days, so that in effect there is a quorum for the action?
So I'll note that in the text of the proposal, the electronic ballot that takes place after the study period is a 14-day electronic ballot with the 14-day automatic quorum language. So the current electronic ballot methodology has been carried over in its entirety, including the 14-day requirement, in order to qualify for a quorum.
No, I understand that, but that's assuming that there's no consensus. But in order to receive a consensus, you need to have a quorum. And all I'm suggesting, I don't say it has to be 14 days. We just need to establish somewhere that the time frame for the study period is, in fact, the quorum. That if it's 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 6 days, so that action is taken by a properly queried entity.
That's, I think, a good point, yes. I'll note also that the markup conference requires a regular quorum as if it were an in-person meeting, but I take
that I understood. Yeah.
I take your point that the 7-day interval is a representational fairness measure and should be noted as such.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Yes, I see two. I see Kathy Tilton. Kathy, I think you are also on the audio channel, so please, if you'd like to speak, go ahead.
I think in general, making this more explicit is very useful, and I appreciate all your efforts in doing that. My question has to do with actually what's on the screen now, and something that actually didn't change, where it says that committees may adopt decision-making protocols in its charter consistent with these rules as may be approved by the plenary. Feedback that I've gotten from people that are participating in multiple committees is that when the various committees each have different sets of rules, that it's confusing to folks. And so not right now, but at some point we may want to consider if we want to have the committees all using the same decision-making process.
So I take your point, Kathy. I think I should note that what was done to Section 5 was actually the removal of some text in order to make it clearer that we've actually implemented electronic decision-making procedures. Your comment has to do with a different issue, which is not a electronic deliberation issue. I think I agree with what you're saying. It might more appropriately be raised as a separate amendment.
I agree, and I'm not offering one at this time. I'm just raising the issue for future consideration.
Thank you. Dasa, I believe, has his hand up. Dasa, I believe you're unmuted, so you can speak.
Great. Thanks. So I had two things. Kathy took the first one out of my mouth, which is want to double check that we're setting the right tone for committees or if some maybe procedure is needed for them. The other one was, I was hoping, I realized when I was trying to explain it that maybe I didn't understand well enough, and maybe you could talk us through better the relationship between matters that would go through this process versus if a matter went through the non-electronic deliberation process under the existing rules, and what steps would be the same or different with the consensus parts of Section 5 and the decision-making procedures in Rule Number 1.
So that's a really good question. So we've been using our electronic decision-making procedures up till now as a way to either address issues that were urgent and time-sensitive, where we didn't have the time to wait for an in-person meeting, or to essentially to take procedural matters which could be dealt with in in a non-contentious environment out of the in-person plenary. That isn't the way that I see us moving in the future, right? I think that in the future what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to use e-deliberation as a sort of a first-class decision-making procedure, but not, but with more time setbacks than we've been doing, up till now, right? So I think what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take items which have already been, pretty broadly discussed either in our online forums or in an in-person meeting, and go through some decision-making processes via this procedure. But I'm guessing, that in and I'm intending that in accordance with our consensus decision-making procedures, the things that will be taken up in these sessions will be things where we, as an organization, already have a pretty high degree of confidence that we're going to be able to achieve consensus, and that we would have, a lot of respect for anything that came up as a serious issue in an electronic decision-making procedure, and that we would, divert that back into discussions if it happened. Did that answer the question?
I think it did. And luckily we've got some rounds now of when people can think it through and try different scenarios as we move toward a decision making.
So, Kathy and Dasa, if you could put your hands down on the little blue guy, just so that I can see whether anybody has additional comments. Or not. Okay. Oh, wait. Let's see. Dasa, do you still have something to say, or are you?
I'm sorry. I'm fighting with a little blue guy. Excuse me.
Okay. No worries. So is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Okay, well, in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, and by the way, I'll ask you to do one of three things. So, the text of this hasn't been up for very long, so probably not everybody is completely familiar with it. So what I'd like you to do at this point is I'd like you to go down to the little blue guy in the left-hand side and click on his arrow, and you'll see that you have 4 options. You have a hand up, you have a little blue guy looking all smug with his hand down, you have a red X, and you have a green check mark. If you think that the procedure that's been described for electronic decision-making seems to be in fairly good shape, please select the green check mark. If you feel that you don't yet have enough information to form an opinion, please remain as a little blue guy. And if you feel that there is something badly wrong with the decision-making procedure and it needs to go through some more hardcore work, please make yourself into a little red X. And I will give you a couple of minutes to indicate your opinion. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So 16 out of 53 are pretty comfortable. Nobody is very uncomfortable, but the remaining 53 minus 16 don't have enough information. So I think what I'm going to do on the basis of this, I think this is an indicator of comfort but not certainty. So I think what I'll do is I will ask the Secretariat to send an email reminding people that the text of the deliberation procedure exists. I will open up a comment in the comment area in the forum online on the IDESG webpage, and I will have people go through a little bit more discussion in order to turn up any issues that may be present. And if it turns out that everybody in the course of that discussion seems to be pretty comfortable, then we will probably take it to electronic ballot, but I want to give it a little bit more time for people to register discomfort and objections, so that if it really is warranted, we will take it into a discussion at the Boston meeting. I feel like 16 or 17 out of 53 isn't enough for a slam dunk to go straight to an electronic ballot yet. Is there anyone who... Oh, Steve Mednick has his hand raised. Steve.
Yeah, just a procedural matter, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out that the Management Council has yet to review it, so they've got to technically jump into this as well. And the other thing I would say from scanning the list, just a little color commentary, many of the people, like myself, who are not voting members probably didn't vote, had nothing to do with how I felt about it, but you may be getting some of that in here today as well, that there's a number of people who are not voting members on here that might have, who might not have voted for
I agree. It is a somewhat unscientific poll. Agreed. And it is a good point about the Management Council, so we will additionally wait for the Management Council's formal comments on the proposal. Okay, well, I believe that with that we have concluded the formal agenda. I want to thank everybody for staying on a Friday afternoon before Father's Day here in the U.S. To complete this business, and I want to ask whether there are any other comments or questions that we should take up before we adjourn the meeting. I'm waiting to see whether anyone raises a hand. I see Judith typing. Okay. So I see no one expressing a burning desire to stay on the telephone deep into a Friday afternoon. So with that, I will formally adjourn this meeting, and thank you very much for your participation.
Happy Father's Day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.